Please don't come to our wedding. If you won't accept that, we'll have to cut ties." Nodding in agreement to those words was Elizabeth, the wife of my eldest son. Realizing how much they detested me made my heart sink. What have I done to them? Wasn't I just fulfilling my role as a mother and mother-in-law? Where did I go wrong? Why have they come to hate me so much? To be told to miss their wedding must mean it's serious. But I can't think of anything I might have done. Neither can my husband. It's unforgivable. After all the care and upbringing, to be treated this way. This behavior is unimaginable from a son to his mother. I must make them understand once and for all. They'll learn the hard way what it means to neglect a mother. My name is Helen, a 55-year-old homemaker. We have 2 sons. Our eldest, Michael, works in a company in the city, earning a handsome salary as an elite. On the other hand, our younger son, David, has always been quiet, preferring delicate tasks, so he works in a manufacturing factory locally. Although the boys got along well in their younger years, as their egos developed, Michael began to despise David unilaterally. He would belittle David in front of us and even bully him at school. No matter how much we scolded Michael, his attitude towards David never changed. However, Michael is set to marry soon. His fiancée, Elizabeth, apparently works at the same company. "Elizabeth wants to meet you guys too, so we've arranged for a dinner," he said. When we received that message, we felt relieved, thinking we could finally see our son off. Though Michael insisted David not attend, David himself said, "It's easier for me that way." So my husband and I decided to buy him a souvenir on our way back. Then came the day of the promised meeting. We were directed to a rather expensive restaurant, where a private room had been booked. Entering the room Michael had mentioned, we found him and a strong-willed woman already seated. "You're late, Mom and Dad." "Sorry, dear, we got a bit lost in this unfamiliar place. Don't embarrass me too much." Though Michael's harsh words hurt, I tried not to take it to heart, as it was typical of him. We took our seats and began to dine on a meal that was truly lavish, all while listening to the conversation between the two. Elizabeth listens to everything I say and thinks ahead for our future. Elizabeth is really exceptional. If someone like her had been by my side earlier, I could have achieved so much more. Elizabeth is a perfectionist, far more distinguished than you two. Michael was gushing about his fiancée Elizabeth. Sitting next to him, Elizabeth, looking pleased, chimed in, "Michael, you're exaggerating." It seemed Michael was head over heels for Elizabeth, as he couldn't stop praising either himself or her. "I'd really like to hear more about how you two met. What brought you together?" But even when I asked, I was dismissed with, "Rather than dwelling on such a boring story, I'd prefer you understand Elizabeth's virtues." The whole meeting felt like a pitch for Elizabeth, making us uncomfortable. My husband also seemed uneasy, and I was glad we didn't bring David along. "I've said it before, but Elizabeth is in a different league from you. Don't mistreat her after we're married. Treat her with respect. We wouldn't dream of mistreating anyone. You wouldn't know. You always favored David, never giving me a second glance. I can't trust you won't do the same to Elizabeth." Michael's words left us speechless. Despite his accusations, our focus on David was only because of Michael's relentless bullying. David had always been troubled by Michael's bullying since they were kids, and as parents, it was natural for us to try to relieve David's stress. Even when we asked Michael why he did it, he would only say, "I just don't like David," without ever addressing the root of the issue. To have this construed as favoring David was utterly unfair. However, not wanting to worsen the atmosphere further, we couldn't retaliate against Michael's words. The tumultuous meeting ended without incident, but it was far from a resolution to the problem. "You guys are getting on in years, right? We'll take care of you, so don't worry," Michael said, unilaterally deciding that they would live with us after the marriage. Elizabeth seemed to agree with Michael, saying provocatively, "You have a son who still hasn't become independent, right? I guess it's up to me to set him straight." This made me feel uneasy instead of reassured. David does live with us, but that's because he actively helps us out, not because he's dependent on us. However, Michael and Elizabeth moved in as if they owned the place, occupying rooms and acting as if they were the masters of the house. "Hey, David, go weed the garden now. It's a job fit for an unemployed person like you. Sorry, but I have work. You have the day off, right? Do it yourself. What did you say? You're really insolent. Michael's pestering of David increased. Seeing David's mature response made me chuckle, despite the situation. But things were more complicated than they seemed. Michael and Elizabeth were planning to drive David and us out of our own house, unbeknownst to us. This became clear one night when everyone else was asleep. I went to the kitchen for some water, noticing the light was on in the living room. When will this house finally be ours? Just a little longer. We have to make sure those nuisances don't come back. Once we get rid of them, I want to renovate. This house is quite outdated. Michael laughed in agreement with Elizabeth's words, saying, "That's right." I couldn't believe it. They were plotting something like this. I immediately consulted with my husband and David. We had to do something quickly, or things could get worse. As we were panicking about what to do, David spoke up. "Mom, leave this to me. I have a perfect plan." David's words were reassuring, but the plan he shared required patience. If everything went according to David's plan, we could thoroughly teach Michael and his fiancée a lesson and drive them out. That's why we decided to go along with David's plan. Despite the issues, life went on, and Michael's wedding date was set. They chose a lovely venue nearby. I thought about having it in the countryside, but the place they showed us was really nice. It's a bit pricey, but we can easily afford it. Michael said with a laugh, which irritated me, but I held back. Michael and Elizabeth continued to antagonize David, but thanks to David's mature handling, it didn't seem too painful. When the wedding date was set, we were summoned by Michael and Elizabeth. Wondering what it was about, David, my husband, and I went to meet them, only to be shocked by what they said. "We want you not to attend our wedding. If you do, we'll cut ties." I was dumbfounded by their words. But I tried to remain calm and asked Michael, "Are you serious? Why do you bring this up now?" "I'm just terrified of you guys. I can't stand the thought of being surrounded by such people at my wedding." Elizabeth responded, pretending to cry, which made me feel even worse. "Like I said, if you don't like it, we'll cut ties. That would be a problem, right? After all, I'm the pride and joy of this family. Unlike that worthless brother," Michael said, pointing at David. David looked unsure of what to say. Seeing this, I finally lost my patience. "Michael, enough is enough. You've always looked down on David. Why do you act this way? You're his brother. Stop treating him so poorly." As I spoke out, Michael and Elizabeth turned their hostility towards me. "You're just as bad. Fooled by his meek act and spoiling him. Is this sibling favoritism? It's always been awful living here. That's because you've always bullied David. That's just an excuse, isn't it? You just couldn't help but favor David, could you?" No matter how many times I said a no, Michael wouldn't listen, and we couldn't have a rational conversation. Why won't he listen to me? Especially when all of this is the result of his own actions. Why won't he reflect on his behavior at all? Despite everything, Michael is still my son. I thought I had to take care of him properly. But now, I've had enough. At that moment, I decided to give up on my son. "Fine, we'll refrain from attending your wedding." I said it, not caring anymore. David and my husband were wide-eyed at my response. However, Michael and Elizabeth seemed very pleased. "Are you sure about this? You might end up regretting it." "Regret? There's no way. A wedding without nuisances like you would be perfect." They laughed. In contrast, our minds were at peace. There's no need to attend their wedding and put ourselves through unpleasantness for their sake. In the end, our family decided not to attend the wedding. We weren't even given invitations, so going to the venue would have been pointless. Michael seemed happy throughout, but he had no idea what this decision would lead to. Thinking about the plan David had shared with us made me quite amused. After Michael and Elizabeth's wedding went off without a hitch, they continued to stay in our house as initially planned. Their workplace was apparently moving closer, and they seemed busier than ever. Once the transfer to their new jobs was complete, and they had their first day at work, they came home in a panic and called for David. "David, what's the meaning of this?" They confronted David, demanding explanations. When I asked what happened, they briefly shared the story. On their first day at work, while being shown around, they unexpectedly crossed paths with David. Their guide, a senior manager named Tyler, upon spotting David, greeted him politely and informed them that David was the president of a key client company. Thinking of David as merely a factory worker, they were taken aback by this revelation. In reality, David had been diligently working at the factory since he was hired, recognized for his efforts by President Johnson, who ran the factory. David's unique ideas were essential for the factory's operations, and he had been respected by his peers from the start. Thanks to David, the factory's performance improved, and it became a go-to for many companies. However, President Johnson fell ill. David, concerned for him, would visit on his days off. Seeing David's dedication to both the factory and its people, President Johnson appointed him as his successor. Initially, David was modest, saying, "I couldn't possibly do it," but President Johnson's decision was firm. With support from those around him, David successfully rose to the position of president. Under his leadership, the factory's performance continued to grow. David, already popular among the employees, gained even more trust as president, showing a natural aptitude for the role. Now, the factory has grown into a nationally relied upon enterprise, and David's name is known even among major companies in the city. David was visiting that company today for a discussion with a client. It was just that, nothing more. However, Michael and Elizabeth, not expecting David to be in such a position, were displeased with the respect he received. There must have been some trickery. "You've always been like that." With that, Michael lashed out at David. "If you had told us, we wouldn't have had to behave that way. Why didn't you tell us?" Elizabeth collapsed in tears. Their reaction was, to say the least, ludicrous. "I made it to the top on my own merit." It's as simple as that, so why are you getting so mad? David said this nonchalantly, with an innocent expression on his face. David said nonchalantly, which only seemed to infuriate Michael further, prompting him to start yelling, "Don't get cocky." However, David calmly addressed Michael. "More importantly, there's something I need to discuss. It's something crucial for you, I believe." Somehow, my husband and I managed to calm Michael and Elizabeth down and got them to sit. David, who had gone to his room to fetch something, returned and began to share the important discussion he mentioned. "First, take a look at this." Saying that, David laid out several photos on the table. The images showed Elizabeth with a flamboyantly dressed man. To put it plainly, they were photos of Elizabeth caught in the act of infidelity. Seeing this, Michael started to thrash around, yelling, "This can't be true." Elizabeth, unsure of what to do, began trembling. Since she was going to be my sister-in-law, I thought it prudent to do a background check. And then, all this evidence came to light. With so much proof, there's no escaping the truth, right? Cornered by David's words, Elizabeth apologized on the spot, saying, "I'm sorry." Unable to believe the situation, Michael was left in utter shock. You see, this is what happens when you don't pay attention to what's inside. Nobody's perfect. David's smirk made us chuckle. Overwhelmed by despair, Michael collapsed to his knees. Elizabeth's incessant apologies were the only sounds filling the room. Eventually, Michael and Elizabeth divorced. Given Michael's unforgiving nature, this outcome seemed inevitable after the affair. Elizabeth was panicking about the demand for alimony, but it appeared her parents managed to cover for her. However, that wasn't enough to heal Michael's wounds. After the shock of his divorce, Michael left his job. Ever since then, he has been shut away in his room, only emerging to eat, barely showing his face. However, whenever David was present, Michael would let out a pitiful "eep" and flee. It seems that since that incident, Michael has developed a fear of David. The family has had numerous discussions about what to do with Michael. Ultimately, with everyone's agreement, it was decided that we would soon cut ties with Michael. This decision will undoubtedly be hard on the current state of Michael. However, our hearts are not broad enough to forgive his selfishness after all this time. A few months later, Michael was forced out of the house. Until the very end, he was crying and begging, "Please forgive me," but honestly, we could no longer see him as part of the family. So we felt this response was justified. Meanwhile, the three of us are enjoying a more relaxed lifestyle without any disturbances. Even though my husband has retired, we are living comfortably, thanks to David's contributions. We want to cherish our thoughtful and filial son, David, from here on out. We will strive to be a good family for David for as long as we live. It appears David is going to get married soon. His partner is a colleague from the same company, with whom he has been in a relationship for several years. We are looking forward to our beloved son's wedding with great anticipation.